Maegevan and Melonin, and well met indeed. I'm Arachir Galadirthan, joined with Jess, and we're going to talk about episode number 5 of The Rings of Power. And as discussed previously, the first thing that we're going to discuss briefly are some corrections from the previous episode. So there are two things I just very quickly wanted to touch upon. The first is in relation to guilds. Last time I said that guilds aren't really a feature, and as someone pointed out, they are a very small feature, but they are indeed a feature, so I was wrong there. In that, in Numenor, there is a Seafarers or Explorers Guild, which is talked about in the Second Age. And all we get of it is its name. And also the Gwaith Myrdain, which is what Celebrimbor is currently building. That, strictly speaking, is a jewel smith's guild, and that's what the name means. So guilds are a concept in Middle-earth, yes. So the Numenorians having guilds is well within keeping of the few daily life things that Tolkien's written about. And the other correction is just to mention that in the lore, Pharazôn, who at the moment is still a very minor character in the show, but will come into his own later, Pharazôn was a well-respected general, not a chancellor. So I mentioned that he's not a chancellor, but I didn't know if he was anything else, but he was a well-renowned general. And of course, he is part of the royal family, as the show has now correctly told you, in that Miriel is his cousin. But I did know that. I don't know if I mentioned that in the last one. But yeah, he's a member of the royal line and he's a well-known general. But they've made him a chancellor because they're going a different way with it. But he's still going to be an important character, as we shall see later. But those are the corrections from the last ones. And then the next step is to dive into Jessica's questions.
Yes. So I didn't have as many questions for this episode, but I do have some of my questions which have moved into the speculation section instead. But I'll start with my first question, which was when we are following the Harfoots, we're going down the map and they're showing us where they're going, and they pass through somewhere that's called the Grey Marshes. And I was just wondering if that's the same Grey Marshes that we see in the films that Frodo and Sam go through that has all the dead people in.
Yes, so it's the same geographical area. They don't become the Dead Marshes until the end of the show. But yeah, that was the hobbits walking through what will become the Dead Marshes, where the ghosts of the elves are. And at the moment, yeah, they're not called the Dead Marshes because the major battle hasn't happened yet.
So is that because that's on the edge of Mordor?
Yeah, it's on the outside of Mordor.
And is that where we see the big battle where they slice off?
No. So in the film, it makes it feel like it's the same, but there is a clear distinction. But no, Sauron is defeated on the slopes of Mount Doom.
So the Dead Marshes, is that before Sauron's defeated?
Yeah, so that was the battle to get into Mordor, where the good forces defeated a large army of Sauron's. They then besieged the Black Gate, they made their way in, and then because they were then besieging Barad-dûr, Sauron himself came out to fight them.
Why did they just leave all the bodies there?
I don't no idea. So that there can be a Dead Marshes.
Well, that's not very poetic. Okay. My next question is probably quite a quick one, but Gil-galad refers to Elrond as Perithel? Yes? No?
I mean, it's close enough.
Close. I was close. I tried. Perithel Elrond.
Yeah, that was better.
Why? What does that mean? And why did he refer to him that way?
It just means half elf.
Oh.
Because he is a half elf.
So he says that in like a "I'm putting you in your place" type way.
No, that's just his name. Like our surname, that's just his identifier. It's his full name.
Oh, so it's almost like someone full naming me as if I'm being... Well, I would still say it was like a bit of a telling off way. But anyway. Oh, my other question was around Halbrand. So they keep referring and making a huge deal about his seal. I was just wondering what that seal is for, whether it's anything... Obviously it's his seal, but I was just wondering if it was anything prior to this show.
No, not that we know. So again, Halbrand's entire storyline and all the people in Mordor is all vague. It's an area Tolkien doesn't write about. So it's entirely for Amazon to do what they want, and they've opted to make him have this seal thing that makes you know he's the king. And that's the only reason it's there, from my understanding of the show so far. It's just so that Galadriel can instantly recognise, oh, you're the king, because you've got that seal, or you're at least of the king's people. But it's nothing based in the lore. There's no seal or anything like that described for those people. I mean, they might well have, but that's Amazon filling in a vagueness in their own understanding.
World building. Okay. Well, they were all my questions, because my other two that I had, I think it would probably be better if we were to speculate on them. So we have like a semi question, but I think it will merge into speculation. So I feel like we should probably move that to the end.
Okay.
So I guess we'll then move on to questions that we've had on the videos or in the Discord.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the first question was from Alex Reese. And it said, "Hi Gallo and Jess, question for the next video. Why did the Tolkien estate not allow Amazon more rights, the Silmarillion, etc.? As surely by not allowing the writers to use more of the expanded lore and stories, it would only damage or worsen the plotline and therefore make the show worse, and would go against the interests of the estate and Tolkien's work."
So, why Amazon or why the estate hasn't sold certain things, we just don't know. Maybe they were left orders not to sell certain things, or they just want to keep other things closer to them, sell them at a later time, maybe, or I just don't know. That's all speculation. The only thing that I've seen written, but I don't know if it's actually correct, so I would encourage you to research it yourselves as well. But I have seen a few people bandy around the theory that the estate hasn't sold any rights that Tolkien himself did not already sell. So to explain that slightly simpler, Tolkien himself sold the rights to some of his works whilst he was alive, and I had seen it written that then the estate only allows those rights that he originally sold to continue being sold around. So Amazon didn't buy the rights direct from the estate, they bought them from whoever the estate had already sold them to. And so once the rights are out there, they can then be sold on like a product. To my understanding, I could be wrong in that regard. I don't do intellectual property law, so I don't know the finer points of it. But that's what I've seen written. But as I say, I don't know the veracity of that. It could well be wrong. But I also have seen that on a case-by-case basis, Amazon asked for certain rights to be released to them, and the estate said yes to various bits and bobs. And I think where we've seen that is in the very first episode with Galadriel's flashbacks. I think Amazon had to ask the show, can we please show the trees? Can we please show Finrod? Can we do this? Can we do that? And that's why you get them for split seconds. They're not major plot points. They're barely anything. But that, as I understand it, is where they've asked for individual things. But that is all we know really about the rights. I don't think Amazon themselves have said, or the Tolkien estate have stated why they haven't sold anything else. So I don't know. But some people might, but I've just never been all that interested in why they may or may not have sold their rights. But that's all I know.
Okay, the next question. And I'm going to apologise because Ed has not made it bigger and my eyesight is not as good as his. And so I'm going to be poor at reading, and I'm going to entirely blame that on the fact that Ed won't make it bigger for me. So the next question is from Boscanari, and his question is on Anarion, and says, "Why have we not seen or heard about Isildur's younger brother, or did I miss this?"
So we have had Anarion mentioned twice, and in both times Elendil mentioned it in a sort of frustrated way, so I can assume that Anarion has done something Elendil disagrees with, but they have mentioned him. He is going to be in the show by the sound of it, given that they've actually mentioned him, and of course he is Elendil's son, and Elendil will become more important later. So I think he's going to come into the show later, but for the moment they don't want to just throw too many characters at you, so I assume they've cut him for that reason. And he's going to be off doing something else. I don't know what, but he has mentioned him. If you watch the show back, he's mentioned at least twice, maybe 3 times.
Didn't they mention him about his brother going off to the west?
Something like that. Yeah, he did something that Elendil was not happy with. He says something like, oh, and all of this on top of your brother doing something, but I can't remember what he said. But yeah, so he's been mentioned, but it was very, very fleeting. It was blink and you'd miss it mentions. So I think he will be in the show later, but they just need to thin the characters down or get everyone to know who all the characters are first, which they could have done by not having the hobbits in it, but that's a whole other thing, isn't it? But hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, the next one is from Galvatron, and it's an unrelated question to the show, but has asked, is the Mirror of Galadriel a Palantir or something similar? So that's the mirror that we see in the film, isn't it? And there's also one, isn't there one at the tree with Gil-galad? Isn't that one?
No, I don't think so.
No?
When is there one at the tree?
So, you know where the big tree is that gets sick? There's one to the left if you're looking at it from a wide back
well, I think
shot.
that's just an artistic basin. I don't think it's going to be a mirror.
I think it's going to be a mirror.
So the Mirror of Galadriel is not a Palantir. It is just a magical mirror that Galadriel has power over, and it shows a person that looks into it a vision of either the past, the present, or the future. And as Galadriel says in the film, it could be a vision that's not going to happen, or it could be something set in stone. Everyone's vision is different, and it doesn't always play out. Samwise looks into the mirror as well, and he gets presented with a choice. So he gets to see, if I do this, this will happen, or if I do that, this will happen. Whereas obviously Frodo is shown what will happen if he fails. So the mirror is its own entirely unique thing, which is a recurring theme in Lord of the Rings, because Tolkien was bound by a common problem in Lord of the Rings. Tolkien was bound by his mortality. So there are loads of things where he mentions them once. They then spur off millions of questions, and he never answers them because, of course, he ran out of time. And the mirror is one such thing. We know so little about the mirror. And in many ways, and I know people will scream at me for this, and they might now unsubscribe, the mirror is kind of just a plot device, and he never had time to expand on it. But it's not a Palantir. It's wholly unrelated. It is literally just Galadriel's power manifested in a physical thing. The mirror itself isn't what's mystical, more so Galadriel's power over it is my reading of it, but others might read it differently. But no, it's not a Palantir.
So the next question is from Game of Ghost, and they've asked, what's the link between Sauron and the Palantir? Is there one in Mordor that he uses to communicate with all the others, or does he have some kind of link through them all?
So Sauron captures a Palantir in the Third Age with the fall of Minas Ithil, which we all know as Minas Morgul if you watch the films, where the Witch King is, with the great green beam of light that goes up into the sky. But that was originally called Minas Ithil, and that was where Isildur was based himself, and he had a Palantir there. And when Minas Ithil fell, Sauron captured that Palantir and took it back to Barad-dûr. So he uses that one to communicate with all the others. So that's how he just stole it, basically. So he doesn't have any special connection. He just happens to have a Palantir, and he uses it to try and spy on the rest of the world.
Why does it change from Minas Ithil to Minas Morgul?
Because it's been lost. So the Gondorians renamed it to Minas Morgul because that means Tower of Sorcery. And they didn't want to call it Minas Ithil anymore because it had been like ruined and corrupted. So they renamed it.
And with the Palantir, so Sauron uses it as like a spying thing. He can't like control what others see in them.
No, Sauron can, again, leading back to the Palantir question from before, when a powerful person uses the Palantir, they can sort of twist its use a bit. And Sauron is able to project like visions to the people on the other side of the Palantir. So, and the most common time we see this is that Denethor looks into the Palantir, which the film doesn't ever touch on. But something the rest of us know about Denethor is that he fights with Sauron in the Palantir, and Sauron tries to send him visions of what's going to happen to try and drive him mad. And Denethor is able to hold off and like to fight against those visions, like with just normal human willpower. But eventually he does succumb to it, and the film cuts all of that out and just makes it seem like Denethor's mad. But in truth, he actually fights with Sauron in a battle of willpower through the Palantir. Because he wants to use it to learn things as well, and he does do that. And Denethor is actually a much better character than the film would have you believe, but I can understand why they cut him down. It makes sense for the runtime. But yeah, Sauron can use it to project visions of like, this is what's going to happen to you. So he can lie to people through it. But that's just because Sauron is an all-powerful Maiar, so he can do a lot more than a normal person can. Denethor couldn't send visions through it, for example, but Sauron can. So yeah, he uses it to manipulate.
I mean, they make Denethor a little bit better in the film, in the extended editions, don't they? They show.
Well, there's one scene, but no, they don't even make him better. They make Boromir and Faramir better.
Yeah.
But Denethor specifically says, "Do not talk to me of Faramir. I know his uses, and they are few." So the extended scenes make Boromir and Faramir more relatable. But they keep with the theme of Denethor being an angry, hateful man.
Oh yeah, I'm getting confused with the other king that has the guy whispering in his ear. Theoden, and he has the one that Grima whispering in his ear.
I don't think they have really any extended scenes. They only have the one where Eowyn cries over Theodred's body.
Yeah, but that's why I got it confused in my head.
Right.
Anyway, sorry.
It's all right. Oh no, we're already on it.
Gad's coming back now. She'll come blaring in a second. It's Vic has 2 questions. So the first question is, are the orcs their own race of beings, or are they tortured and modified elves? In the films it looks like they're made from the goopy tar stuff at Mount Doom, but that doesn't seem to have been the case here.
I'm just going to answer the question again. So there are 3 main theories about the creation of the orcs, and I didn't want to talk about the orcs too much because you can get into a lot of detail, but trying to briefly explain it, the 3 theories are that either the orcs are all corrupted humans, or they're corrupted elves, or they are created. And depending on when you join in with Tolkien's writings, he thought different things himself. But the settled upon and the most common belief behind the orcs is that they are a mixture of corrupted elves and corrupted humans. Because with each individual theory, it creates so many problems. Like, Tolkien sets in his universe that nothing except Eru Ilúvatar can give life. So he's the only thing that can create life. And this is something we see with the dwarves, where Aule created the dwarves, like he sculpted their form, but Eru was the one who actually breathed life into them. Aule couldn't bring them to life, he could only create them. So anyway, so we've got this attested precedent that only Eru can create life, and he wouldn't create orcs. So that kind of ruins the theory that the orcs are created. So the prevalent theory is that it's a mixture of corrupted elves and corrupted humans. But then that leads to problems of its own, because if you corrupt an elf, the elf's soul would remain. So then you have the question of, do orcs go to Valinor when they die, like the rest of the elves' souls, which go to the halls of Mandos? Or do orcs do something different because they've been corrupted? And this is, again, just stuff we just don't know. So in a nutshell, the general theory is that orcs are twisted and corrupted humans and elves, a mixture of both.
Because we see, don't we, when Galadriel's in the bit in the north, and there's like something coming out of the stone, isn't there, that's obviously been like frozen mid-creation. You remember?
No.
So
she fights a troll at the start of the show.
Yeah, so in that bit, there's like a thing coming out of the wall. Like in that like workshop, there's like a beast that looks like an orc, like an early orc, coming out and is stuck in the stone. Because I was convinced that was going to come to life and like blink or something, and that was going to be a jump moment, but they didn't. So I was wondering, that would insinuate from the show that they are created or awoken beings that they've melded together somehow.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously the show can change what they want, but I imagine they'll leave it vague. Most people tend to leave the orc creation vague because Tolkien himself just never really settled on an answer. Generally speaking, when following Tolkien's writings, whatever he wrote last is usually taken as the agreed upon principle. But that's not always the case. Sometimes people disregard his later writings in favour of earlier ones on certain topics. So it's a whole big debate, really. Each person can read into it how they want, but generally, most people agree orcs are corrupted humans and corrupted elves, a mixture of both.
Okay. And then It's Vic's second question is, how are the lives of the elves linked to the tree in Lindon? Why is the tree affected by the darkness in the east? When the rest of Middle Earth seems to be unaffected. So like she means that the bit in between Mordor, where all the animals have died, and then the bit between where obviously I mean the hobbits, the Harfoots obviously gone through the forest, which we don't know which forest that is, but they've gone through the forest, and they've said how it's bare, but that tree has obviously already got blackness on it, which we haven't seen elsewhere.
So that is entirely Amazon's creation. There is no attested lore for the tree in Linden. It's all a nonsense. It's just to give a sort of physical representation of the elves dying out. Because the elves do eventually fade into nothingness, but they don't really. They just abandon Middle-earth and go back to Valinor. Arwen's the only one that really fades, and that's because she chooses to. So it's all for the show. I can't answer your question, I'm afraid. Amazon have decided that they need to have something that raises the stakes for the elves. They've made it up into this tree thing, and that's where we're getting this mithril plot point. Which is just, convoluted nonsense so that Elrond can have a time limit, is what it says to me.
So they're not technically they're not technically going to become mortal from the darkness in lore.
Well, there is no darkness in lore. That's what I mean. So the elves in Middle-earth have two choices: stay in Middle-earth and then fight until they're killed in their mortal form, or go back to Valinor. There's no like seeping darkness which is going to cover them all and remove them. That's not really a concept.
But then that could just then also be Gil-galad's lie to make Elrond give up that they have found something. So he's kind of created that.
I don't think he's created a dying tree.
No. I'm saying that he's created the lie that they're mortal form. They're immortal.
No, I think I don't. I think you're reading way too much into it. Amazon have created this whole thing so that there's some stakes to Elrond's storyline.
Okay, right.
I think it is as simple as that. They felt that they needed some sort of time gated aspect. Because then otherwise there would be no rush. So I think it's just the whole thing is an Amazon creation, and only they would know why they felt the need to put it in. The elves would have wanted mithril anyway. They don't need to have this, we're dying unless we get the mithril storyline. It's just all there just to make the story seem deeper. When I don't think it needs to, but maybe the casual viewer wouldn't be invested if the elves just wanted the mithril because it's a really good ore. So they need to have something that's like, oh god, they've got to get the mithril. But so there's nothing in lore that backs up the tree or any of that kind of stuff.
Because isn't Gil-galad meant to be a good guy in the end?
He is a good guy. He's a good guy even now.
He doesn't seem like a very good guy right now.
Well, I think that's just the way the guy's playing him. He's the High King of the Elves, and it's just because Elrond and Durin's storyline isn't going to have any actual enemies until potentially the Balrog comes along. And so until then, like with any show, they want it to have a sort of friction relationship. So they've made Gil-galad the sort of face of that friction, even though in truth he's good. They're trying to make it more grey, aren't they? They're trying to make it so Gil-galad is doing the right thing, but he's going about it in the wrong way. Like his intentions are good, but his actions are bad. And that's what they're trying to paint him as, which is just something we see so much. It's very basic writing concept that we see a lot. Whereas in truth, Gil-galad is the High King of the Elves. He's a totally good person, and he's only got the thoughts of all in Middle-earth at mind. He wants to protect everyone.
Fair enough. Okay. So the next question is from Joe Desert. Any chance that Adar is Maeghlin, burnt face and black blade like his father Eol? Like his father Eol. His father. Like Eol. Just like Eol. Who's his father?
I mean, they'd have to retcon his story. Maeghlin dies thousands of years ago, so I don't think it's going to be Maeghlin. I really do think Adar is just going to be a bad elf. The Amazon just wanted to have, again, trying to make the show not seem super black and white. They're trying to have lines of grey with some, so that you, the viewer, thinks, all elves are supposed to be good, and then they show Adar, and it's and Adar's a baddie, and like, whoa, bad elves, I didn't know they existed. And I think that's all it is. I don't think there's any more to Maeghlin than that. To Adar than that, sorry.
Because Adar gets really annoying when he's referred to as Sauron by the guy, doesn't he?
But again, that's just Amazon again. I mean, Adar at this point, if they're going for the plan that Sauron is still, that none of the characters on screen are Sauron, and that Sauron hasn't come back yet, then Adar may well very be just trying to create his own kingdom. He may not be working for Sauron at all. And maybe that's something the show will do again, and Sauron will eventually kill him and take over his armies. I mean, I don't know. But that wouldn't be outrageous because Sauron's been missing for hundreds of years. So Adar might just be striking out on his own. That's perfectly acceptable. But I don't think he'll be Maeglin. No. Maeglin's core concept is he dies. It would change so much of the story if he was still alive. So I don't think it's him. No.
Because I'm sure you told me that Sauron didn't refer to himself as Sauron, or he didn't like the name, or have I read that somewhere? So it was something that someone else called him.
He has hundreds and hundreds of names. Sauron is a name given that we know him as almost from the very beginning. In fact, I think Sauron is the most common name. I don't actually know. I mean, he calls himself so many different things when he's in different forms. The elven name for him is Gorthauer, but they don't really call him that very often even in the book. He's just called Sauron so much, it's so linked to him. But I don't know if that's a name he preferred or if he called himself something else. I know that he calls himself like King of Kings and King of Mankind and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know if there's a preferred Sindarin name he gives himself. I just think he's known as Sauron. Well, I'm just trying to think of through them. He has like 15 names or something stupid. I just don't know if one of them is preferred by him, but someone in the comments might know.
I was only because obviously if that was the case, and then there is meant to be the insinuation that he is going to be Sauron, then maybe because someone has called him that's why he then like freaks out and is like, "Do not call me that. That's not the." That
would require Adar to be Sauron.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But
he's definitely not Sauron. That's way too obvious. He's the least likely to be Sauron of all the people we've seen. I would go with the theory that one of the hobbits is Sauron more than Adar.
That's not.
But I haven't read much into that theory, but I just know that some people think one of the hobbits is Sauron, which is silly. Anywho.
Next question is from Natlev Chapman, and it is there any particular or mix of civilizations from our history that Numenor is based on?
So it's a touch of a spoiler, but the show's already shown you that something bad's going to happen to Numenor. But Numenor's story is a retelling of the Atlantis myth. So much so that the downfall of Numenor, spoiler alert, is called the Akalabeth, but in the Elvish language of Quenya, it's called Atalante. That is how much of a coincidence that Tolkien made it about Atlantis. So Numenor's story is based on Atlantis, but the culture of Numenor isn't based on anything in our world. Very few, to none, in fact. The only link that I've ever really seen to our real world with cultures of Middle-earth is that Tolkien describes Gondor as having a Mediterranean-like climate. And that is about it. He never directly links any culture to any nation in our history. So there's never any real links at all. But Numenor is a totally alien beast. So the show seems to have combined three cultures. They've gone for a Greco-Roman and Mesopotamian theme. So that's like Babylon. Which some of you may have heard of. So they've gone for an ancient, classic era theme behind the culture for Numenor, which I think works quite well. But Tolkien doesn't set any kind of culture for Numenor, so they can do whatever they want. Tolkien did draw, there's one famous picture from Tolkien where he drew a Numenorian warrior, and it isn't based on anything in real life at all. And he has a helmet that's designed to look like a shell, and it looks really, really, really fantasy-esque. And to my mind, not in a good way. I don't like the image at all. But so Tolkien, that's the closest we get to a culture, really, and it's nothing like we have in our world. So I think Tolkien's plan is very much to have these nations not be a copy or a link to one of our own cultures. But it's only natural that we would draw on inspiration from our cultures if we were making visual representations. So I can understand why they've gone for a classical era theme. But if it were to be based on anything, it would be Atlantis. And Atlantis was a Greek myth, so it stands to reason then it would look Greek.
Okay, so we will now move on to speculations from the show. Now, I had two things, potentially three things that I wanted to bring as a speculation.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any?
No, not from this episode. I don't think there was much speculation-based things that you could think.
I would disagree. So the first one was around the wizard. I want to say she's a woman. The one with the really, like, the tight buzz cut. And
Eminem.
It's not Eminem though, is
She
it?
looks like Eminem. When the trailer released, everyone jokingly referred to that person as evil Eminem.
Well, that person. I saw in the show, I think it was the one that had the moon, or the thing that looked like a moon, like a plate that looked like the moon. And it had that constellation on the back that the stranger was trying to draw, and then Nori was like, oh, that's a constellation, that's stars, and then they went and stole his pages from his book from the other Harfoot. So I was just wondering, obviously they're not that kind of cult, I'm assuming probably wasn't in the lore.
Well, so Numenor's history, they started falling away from the elves on their own, as I've mentioned before. And then when Sauron comes to Numenor, this is massive spoilers because it will happen in the show. But when Sauron comes to Numenor, he then takes their hatred and he times it by 10. So he turns a group of people who are thinking like, oh, maybe the elves actually really are our enemy. And they're at the point where they are thinking the elves are our enemy. And he takes them a step further and has them then worshipping the dark Valar called Morgoth or Melkor, to the extent that they start sacrificing humans to Melkor. Like, they really fall from grace. And at that point, cults do start rising up, cults following Melkor and some following Sauron himself. And because the show's tinkering with the timeline, those three cult-looking people, I think, are going to be Sauron cultists. So the show is introducing them before it's introduced Sauron. And so my theory is that they are Sauron cultists and they're already working on Numenor. Which would then lead in, as you say, if they've got a picture of this constellation, it leads in still further and reinforces in my mind even more that the stranger is going to be Sauron and he's just forgotten who he is. Because then if he's trying to get to that constellation and then this what is to my mind an obvious cult of Sauron are also trying to get to it, it seems to me that those two plot points are going to link up and they're going to find their master, and that's going to be when we find out he's Sauron.
Like awaken his memories.
Yeah, that's my thinking.
Because my other one was around him, because I know that lots of stuff is around him potentially being a wizard, because obviously he heals himself and he has the look similar to like Radagast, doesn't he? Kind of like a young Radagast.
I think he looks like Gandalf. I think they're trying to make him look exactly like Gandalf. Like, they've chosen someone that looks like Ian McKellen to try and really make you think it's Gandalf.
No one's going to be Ian McKellen though, let's be honest.
Well, no, but Ian McKellen's too old now, so they'd have to get someone younger.
They could have done CGI. They could have
Yeah,
done
but
anything.
the CGI never works, does it? It's always noticeable.
Yeah, that is true. Anyway, my thing was because that is a big thing that people keep saying or suggesting. However, there was a big point around the fact that Nori and the other Harfoot, Poppy, said how the flames weren't hot. And then obviously Galadriel said in the northern bit that I cannot remember the name of, that their torches and stuff aren't giving off any heat because it was so evil that it's sucking away all the heat, or it can't give off any heat. So I feel like there's more weight with him being someone evil, or is going to be someone evil, because of that. Because if it was a wizard, surely because they're a good person and they've come from the nice gods, people, then it would be hot if they suddenly land in the ground because they're nice. Yeah,
I mean, I completely agree. I think that's the biggest. To my mind, the biggest clue that he's going to be Sauron, or at least someone evil. The whole thing with Galadriel mentioning, as you say, oh, it's so evil that your torch doesn't give off heat, and then Nori very clearly says it's not hot. I feel like that's just massive foreshadowing. I just really feel the stranger's going to be Sauron, yeah. He could, of course, be Saruman, but then that would be such a retcon of Saruman's character, because Saruman is not evil when he comes to Middle-earth. he becomes, and he doesn't even become evil. He is a grey character. Saruman comes to the conclusion that the best way to save the world is to join Sauron and replace him. So that's Saruman's plan, is to overthrow Sauron. Sauron learns of that, and so is quite happy that Saruman dies. Well, he doesn't. He does. He gets stabbed, but that his plans come to nothing because Gandalf encourages the Rohirrim to win, and then they do that. So I don't think it's going to be Saruman, but that's what some people have suggested. The only other realistic alternative to my mind with the lore behind me is that the stranger is going to be one of the blue wizards. But I just think that's going to be so tricky because the Hobbit films, and again, we're coming back to real life now, but the Hobbit films very clearly did not have the rights to the blue wizards. Because there's a scene where the dwarves and Gandalf are riding through a forest and they ask about the wizards, and Gandalf mentions that there's 5 in his order and he can't remember the names of the other 2. And that's because he wasn't legally allowed to say them. So I don't know if I just don't feel like the show's going to have the rights to the blue wizards. So I don't feel like it's going to be one of them. But that would line up because from a lore point of view, and this leads back onto Tolkien's constant rewritings, is that originally Tolkien had the blue wizards coming with the other 3 in the 1000th year of the Third Age, which is after this whole story is concluded. But then in a later writing, he changed his mind and he said that the blue wizards came in the Second Age about the time that the rings were created, which obviously lines up perfectly because that's literally what the show covers. Although they've done away with the timeline, that doesn't matter. But it lends itself to them being a blue wizard. But I just do feel confident that they don't have the rights to the blue wizards. So I can't see it being one of the blue. And also the blue wizards came as a pair, famously, and there's only one of him. And if they were going to do both, they'd do both. So I just don't think he's going to be a wizard. And I just really feel confident he's the current front runner for being Sauron. I don't believe Halbrand's Sauron, which is the point you're then going to come on.
I'm going to get onto that.
So what's your thinking of why you think Halbrand's Sauron?
Because my thinking of Halbrand could possibly be Sauron, and I realise that lots of people don't agree. But my only thinking was because when he was smithing and making the sword, then it like zoomed in on the fire and him doing it, and it was all like mystical and magical. And he had skills and he could be making it better to get him bumping up the ranks to show that he's good at stuff.
Nah, I think that was just a flourish to show you that he's a good smith.
He's a good smith. Why would he be a good smith, though, if he was a king?
Well, I mean, that whole thing's a nonsense. Númenóreans are like ultimate humans. They're like Space Marines. Oh, that's a bit of an unknown reference, but Space Marines are like humans plus from the Warhammer universe, and the Númenóreans are like that. Everything they do better than normal humans. And the fact that a normal human has made it into has been accepted as a smith is a nonsense. But then again, I suppose that then leads itself to maybe he's more than a normal human and he might be Sauron. Because Sauron is the best smith in the world. Celebrimbor comes close second, but Sauron is the best after Aule, who is the literal god of smithing. We've talked about him before. And they've mentioned Aule's name a few more times now, which is quite cool. So Sauron is the best smith. So that does lend itself to him being Sauron. But I just think Halbrand's he's the king of the dead. He's just going to be the king of the dead. It lines up so perfectly. He's going to strike up a friendship with Isildur now that they're both going back to Middle-earth. He's going to swear his oath to him. And then at the end of the show, he's going to break his oath. And everyone's going to be like, oh my God, it's the king of the dead. I just think that's too easy a story to create. That's too obvious.
I had another point to back up that theory, was because he apologises for all people, and her brother, not just my people or the humans. He says,
but why would he? Well, I suppose that's him being duplicitous. But why would he apologise for people? He literally ordered the death of Galadriel's brother. But then that could be making him more likeable. They could be making him more likeable. He wouldn't want to give himself away to Galadriel, but. Yeah, possibly. I wouldn't be surprised if Halbrand was Sauron, but my money is on the Stranger. Either the Stranger, or we just haven't met Sauron yet, and he's going to come. He's going to be introduced in the last episode as there's the enemy finally. Galadriel was right. And to be honest, I think if I was a betting man, I would put most of my money on the Stranger being Sauron, but I would put a little bit on that Sauron. We haven't met him yet, so that's how I kind of feel. I'm not 100% behind the Stranger theory. But I think the stranger is the most likely of the people we've seen. And that's my thinking. But other than that, though, in terms of speculation-wise, I don't have anything else from this episode.
I did.
Oh, but you've read them all.
No, I've got my last one about the hilt.
Oh, right. Oh, okay.
So my last one was around, we see more or learn more about the hilt that Theo has stolen from
The basement.
guy, the basement of the man. And obviously it's mentioned as a key, and we see it as a sword, finished as a sword in that picture. And I was just wondering, in the lore, could that be something like, for example, it's like a Morgul blade? That's correct terminology. So could it be like a Morgul blade, and so the people that use it, so Theo, for example, could stab himself or do something, or like a human or whatever, they're stabbed, and then that unlocks where Sauron could be trapped. And similar to how when Frodo's stabbed, he then sees the Nazgul as the kings.
No, he sees the Nazgul as the kings because he puts the ring on.
He still, something happens with the thing with when he
So
gets stabbed.
when he gets stabbed, then the Morgul blade's magical power slowly turns him into a wraith, like the ring wraith.
Right.
And so I mean, I think it's supposed to be similar to a Morgul blade, but I mean that's a sound theory that it's going to be a key to unlock Sauron himself. But there's no lore basis for whatever this little sword thing is. It's just an Amazon thing. So who knows what they're going to do with that? We just have to wait and see, I suppose.
Okay, well, that was my... Oh, and the... you had a little chuckle when, or like I saw you smile when we saw the hilt, and then it came, we were looking at the picture, and then you smiled, and you said that it looked like that's going to be a hint, nudge, nudge, for Sauron, because you said it looked like a mask.
I mean, yeah, I thought that was fairly obvious. That mural is designed to look like Sauron's mask, so that again, all of you, what I would call laymen, or when you're not listening, plebeians, you can think like, oh, that's Sauron's mask. Oh, it's going to be Sauron, isn't it? And obviously, you're not all idiots, but in my mind, when I'm thinking of people that don't know about the lore, I'm judgmental and rude. But it was obviously a mask of Sauron designed to look like the same Sauron that Peter Jackson used, so that again, all of the people that don't know the story can think, oh, that's obviously Sauron. And then that's why the sword is then going to be linked to Sauron, even though it's obvious it already is. But it's just more adding on to just in case you hadn't been hit over the head enough to know, the hilt is bad and it's connected to Sauron.
I wasn't saying that. I am definitely not a plebeian. I feel like I know more than the average person about Lord of the Rings, and I feel like I'm more than...
Answer me this one simple question.
No.
What did you think of the books when you read them? I think that solves that argument rather soundly, doesn't
They're
it?
on my list.
Jessica's not read
They're
the
on
books.
my list.
She is a film fan only. So
I have read many books.
feel free to unsubscribe and dislike the video now. But you're being spoken to by someone who hasn't even read the book.
That's why I'm not giving any answers. I am more than...
Look how many copies we have. You could read it
I know.
5 times over.
I think we counted. At one time, I think we had nearly 15 copies.
We've never had 15 copies. That's hyperbolic.
One...
I mean, it's
two,
not great
3.
entertainment if you just literally read how many copies we have on the shelf.
We have 6 copies in this room alone.
That's all we have now, though. But anyway,
we have
that is
7 copies in this room alone.
That is our speculation from this time, although there's not much to talk about. Something that I did want to just do, I just wanted to mention because it's been in my head ever since. I really, really like the statue of Eärendil in Númenor, and I just wanted to mention that and say that out loud. I thought that was very cool, particularly that when we got the shot of Eärendil in this episode, if you go back and watch it, we see the camera panning down over the statue of Eärendil, and he's got the Silmaril on his brow, which is correct, and then behind him is the star, which is Eärendil guiding the Silmaril through the sky. And I thought that was a very cool little nod to all of us lore fans. To everyone else, it's just a bright star behind a statue, but to us, it was like, oh yeah, cool, they've actually got Eärendil. And I like that they're showing the statue of Eärendil because they're actually talking about him. And putting aside Celebrimbor's nonsense stories about talking to Eärendil before he fled, which is all made up for the show. It is just cool that they're mentioning Eärendil. You're actually learning about Elrond, which I wasn't expecting the show to do, and I just think that's cool. I'm happy with that. I'm pleased that people will now learn as Elrond more than just Agent Smith, who says ominous things in Rivendell, and now you're actually learning who he is. And so I thought that was cool. And hopefully they'll actually use Elwing's name at some point. They've mentioned Elrond's mother twice now, but they haven't given her name. But maybe because they had to pay for Eärendil. That might be one of the things they had to pay for, because his name is not in the appendices to my knowledge, but it might be. But if his name's there, Elwing's would definitely be there. So hopefully they'll just say it.
I have one more thing. So the Mithril story, I thought was quite nice. I quite liked that story. I thought it was quite a...
You mean the tree thing?
The tree thing.
Yeah.
But
Grease disagree.
Huh?
Nothing, carry on.
I'm assuming that's incorrect by law standards.
Yeah, the tree thing is made up by Amazon again, and it's an absolute nonsense. It is one of the points where I just scoffed at myself, to be honest. The only reason, to my mind, they've made this elaborate story about an elf putting his power into the tree and a Balrog putting his power into the tree and it creating Mithril. The only reason I think they've done that is to foreshadow the Balrog, so that when the Balrog inevitably rocks up, everyone's going to be thinking, oh yeah, they've already mentioned the Balrog was linked to Khazad-dûm, so they're not going to be as surprised. They're not going to think, where the hell did the Balrog come from? So it's just a little bit of foreshadowing that there's going to be a Balrog. I think that's the only reason they did it. And the fact that this power from the tree created the Mithril is such a joke. That's a nonsense. Not just from a law standpoint, because I'm not a law purist. I'm not going to be out there fighting in the streets for purity of law. But just from a general storytelling standpoint, why can't the Mithril just be in the ground already? Why does it need to have two people put their power into a tree of all things? I just thought it was really weird. How does a tree survive on top of a mountain?
Well, there are trees.
No. After a certain point, you reach a certain height, trees don't live on top of mountains.
But it didn't have to be at the very
It's
top.
too cold. There's no nutrients in the ground. It's not possible for a tree to live. And the Misty Mountains are very tall mountains. And the tallest point of the Misty Mountains, where the tree would have been, is too high up for trees to exist.
Maybe it was just at the bottom of the mountain.
But then we get dangerously close into talking about whether we like the show or not, which we're desperately trying not to do. But the tree thing I thought was a nonsense, and it's just there to foreshadow the Balrog. But Mithril was just in the ground already. And on Mithril, just very briefly to wrap up, a sort of quasi-correction. I mentioned that Mithril is only found in Khazad-dûm because that's what Gandalf says, but as many people have hypothesized, Mithril might have actually been in Númenor and Valinor as well. But it's not going to be a plot point for the story, and certainly in the story, Mithril's only going to be in Khazad-dûm. But just for you, the viewer, do know that there's a chance Mithril was found in Númenor as well. But it doesn't really change anything, but I thought while we were talking about it, we might as well mention it.
But then if they hadn't gone to Númenor, no one's been going to Númenor.
No.
It's like a special thing on Middle-earth, then, isn't it? It's like the best ore that you can get on Middle-earth that they have access to because the trading, etc., hasn't been opened up yet. Yeah,
if Mithril was found on Númenor, they would never have given it to lesser men, and by now they absolutely would hoard it. By this point in Númenor's storyline, Middle-earth was beneath them. They considered themselves the kings of the world. Like they thought all races were beneath them. So they wouldn't have traded something as precious as Mithril. So it works for the story anyway, but just thought I'd say that. But with all your speculation concluded, that wraps up this episode, which has been more speculation-based than question-based. But naturally, I think that's how the episodes might go, because the show's going to start answering questions, and we're not going to be introduced to many new characters. But Jess will continue with any questions that she does have, of course. If you have questions, please do post them either on the Discord in the forum thread that you can see if you join the Discord, or just in the comment section. That's fine as well. Any questions will be considered. Some might be answered by other people, but we may well still read them out, even if they've been answered in the chat. But for now, thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have, and until we speak again, dear friends, Navair Neden Perimad Melunin, and farewell.